Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Rhiannon with me. Rhiannon is a trauma specialist. She is currently an outpatient therapist specializing in LGBTQ plus issues, PTSD slash CPTSD, and cultural trauma, and is currently under pre-licensed supervision, LMHC. Today, Rhiannon will speak about her experience with being an adult who has gone through the complex trauma of a childhood divorce. Rhiannon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Of course, thankful to have you on. So, for people that don't know you as well, do you want to kind of set the scene of who you were as a kid, your family situation, um, and just kind of take us to the beginnings?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually raised in New Jersey. I was born there. We moved to California where my sister was born, moved back to New Jersey, and I spent the first 18 years of my life there before moving up to Massachusetts. For most of it, we were in a suburban town, but it was one of those that a lot of people had been there for generations. So everybody knew each other, everybody was in each other's business. And it could be kind of judgmental. I did okay as a kid. I would say in the early part of my school, so like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I was pretty much okay. Unfortunately, when I was in third grade, so when I was around 8 years old, my parents got divorced. It was not an amicable split at all. There were some pretty tangled involvements regarding police, regarding court orders, restraining orders, custody battles. It was something that, being 8 years old, was very difficult for me to understand. And given the level of, I would say, outward hostility and sometimes physical violence that I would see in my house, it really turned into something that I wasn't able to process, and I wasn't really able to get any sort of comfort or security around. I am the oldest. My sister's a year younger, and I really kind of took on that role. And it was also kind of enforced to me, the role of being the protector. I was the older sister, I was the smart one, and she was the pretty one. And so I was kind of foisted into this position of being her guardian during all this. She had a very different reaction in which she really like blacked out for a lot of it and doesn't remember much of this time period. But I unfortunately remember with acute awareness. So, I do remember these situations of, my parents fighting on the ground, being dragged into the car, and, one of my parents screaming after me, and some, really difficult situations. Like I mentioned, there was legal involvement, there was court involvement. So it was a big world that I was not prepared to be in. And because of circumstance and because of, the way that I was categorized as a kid, a lot more of it got on me, I think, than was probably intended. Um, Maybe even more than any of the grown-ups around me knew. But I was blessed slash cursed with a high level of intuition and observation skills from a young age. So I was really, really present for things that I probably should not have been present for. Um, Unfortunately, that had a big toll on my life and was one of the earliest examples that I can point to of where the mental and emotional toll of trauma on somebody can take a physical manifestation. So when I was around 8 or 9, in the middle of all of this, I developed Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease that attacks the thyroid and causes it to go hypoactive, so underactive. So between, you can kind of see this in like my school photos, between second and third grade, I gained like 40 pounds, 50 pounds. I became very tired, very depressed. I was struggling. My hair got thin and stringy, and nobody knew what was going on. They assumed that it was behavioral because my presentation was like considered precocious. So I was too young to have had that happen to me. So they discounted it. And instead, they brought me to like nutritionists and psychologists and this and that. And unfortunately, that did not help the situation. So I ended up going like 10 years with this undiagnosed. And it was only when I told my mom, senior year of high school, that I was having these weird symptoms that she actually brought me to the endocrinologist and we figured it out. But that had a very big physical impact on me. It gave me body image issues because of my weight problems. It gave me uncontrolled depression and anxiety. I also started developing panic attacks at that age. So I would just have these flashes of terror, ruminating about death and destruction and, things that 8-year-olds generally should not be consumed with.
Yeah.
And that, those were kind of the triggers for more chronic illnesses and more chronic conditions and reactions that I was dealing with. It didn't help that like I had mentioned, since our town was very small and kind of busybody, I got, and my sister got, a lot of social backlash because of the divorce. And even more so when my dad came out as gay, and the town was homophobic. I assume there's still a lot of that rampant in there today, though I haven't been there in years. But it made it harder to move forward because I would go to school, I would be relentlessly bullied, whether it was for my weight, the fact that I was very academic and straight A student, which was probably also a coping mechanism. Whether it was the fact that, my dad was seen holding hands with another man, all these things that, like, there was nothing wrong about any of them, but the kids had decided, probably because they learned from their parents, that it wasn't okay. Yep. So I went to school. I dealt with that every day. I came home to a constantly fluctuating home environment. I was dealing with physical ailments. I was dealing with mental ailments. I was trying to just comprehend my place in the world and not being very successful, and going to bed like rehearsing for the next day. Like, when so-and-so makes fun of me because of this, what will I say? When I get into an argument with this, how could I have done better? And just like those constant cycles for me just never left until, well, sometimes they're still around, honestly. But that was really the linchpin moment, those couple of years, and the repercussions of it, and some of the other interpersonal issues between me and my parents and each other, my parents and other relatives, it all just kind of compounded it. And through high school and college, definitely like had a strain on my mental well-being and the way that I was able to react to or not react to like other milestones in my life.
Yeah. So, I'm going to ask questions here. I don't want to push you too much. You kind of say what you feel like is appropriate. I guess if you can you talk about the lead up, to your parents getting that divorce? Was it quite evident, in the months and maybe years leading up that, this was in the making? Were they having, fights on a regular basis, or was it kind of, they did a good job of, hiding it and then it all suddenly blew up? Or um how was the
Yeah.
lead up?
Yeah. In retrospect, it's very obvious. In the moment, it wasn't quite so. I actually did find out later on, maybe when I was about like 13, I was not directly told, but I discovered through investigation that I was actually an accident. So I was a shotgun baby, and they had me, and then they also, I do not believe, intended to have my sister, but had her as well. Um, and when I was younger, things were largely civil. I do remember there being family time. I do remember them going out on dates. But I would say, yeah, like around when I was 7 or so, when my dad went back to school and my mom was working full time. Um, Around then is when I think things started to change. And it definitely was subtle at first. It was more just like a distancing between the two of them. But there was, I would say, there was a kind of a ramp up period where there was verbal altercation and then there was physical altercation. I remember eating breakfast one morning with my sister on the way to school, or getting ready for school, and my parents having an actual like on the floor fist fight and just like screaming terrible things at each other. And I kept my sister like in the kitchen. I was like, here, just eat your oatmeal. Like, let's get ready. Like, cause I didn't want her noticing that was happening. But that's like one of the images that was burned in my head forever. Um, so things like that happened. And then, so it really, it was a shock, but I can't say it was a surprise, if that makes sense, when my mom said she was moving out. So it was it was something that, had I had context for, I think in the time, I would have been able to say, okay, there's trouble here. But because I had no experience with that, we were the first, family in my class at least to have a divorce. So I had no context. I had no understanding about it. There had been divorce on my mom's side of the family, but not my dad's. But we don't. My mom's family's in California, and we had pretty much no contact with them, or very little. So I just didn't know. I didn't even know that divorce was a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, so I had to learn really quick.
yeah. um Obviously, I think, given your mental health background today, you understand that seeing physical altercations is not normal. um at that time, uh that was your normal, though. And I'm curious. I'm sure there was an element of like, this is not healthy, and that's why you're protecting your sister. But um how were you processing these things? And that'd be question one. And two, I guess, would the follow up to that would be, from your personal experience, right? There unfortunately might be an 8-year-old girl watching this interview. um I guess, what would you say to yourself at 8 with the knowledge and wisdom you have today? Or what would you say to someone in a pretty similar situation?
Yeah. Um, so to your first question, how did I process it? Poorly. Is probably the answer. Um, I actually I latched on to the idea that I was considered smart and mature for my age. The fact that my parents would sometimes confide in me about each other or about what was going on, and ask me not to tell anybody, but like they treated me in a way that I thought at the time and maybe they thought was being mature and like letting me in on a situation. But knowing what I know now was actually more a parentifying behavior and kind of put me in a role that at that developmental age I shouldn't have taken on. Um, in one way, it did help me because it did give me the opportunity to have some insight on this situation that was very confusing. But on the other hand, it also put responsibilities on me that I don't think were fair to put on me, especially in terms of secret keeping and having to maintain the peace between grown-ups, which is not something an 8, 10, 12-year-old should be tasked to do. And what I would say to somebody going through a similar situation, especially as a kid, what is happening is something that is not your responsibility. It is something that you did not do anything to deserve. It is not something that you need to feel that you have to own or fix. Even if your parents are hurting or, the grown-ups around you are really, not the kind of people that you thought they were, you're seeing different sides of them, scary sides of them. It's okay to feel what you feel about it. It's okay to be sad about it. It's okay to be scared about it. You're not bad or immature or wrong because you're having trouble handling it. These are things that, at this age, you should have stability and support. And if you don't, that's not your fault. So, if you can, and again, it's not your job to do this, but if you think you can and you can find a trusted grown-up, you can find a group of people who will help you feel secure, that you feel safe talking to and feel safe getting your needs met. Maybe it is one of your parents, maybe it's not. But find that, because sometimes you just need to be held and told that you're okay. And that's normal, and that's a good feeling to have.
Yeah. I'm curious, as all of this is going on at home, how was your behavior in school and or, with friends? Did you tell teachers or friends or um how did you act out in school?
I didn't need to tell anyone because everybody was a gossip. So people found out. I'm going to give a little content warning here because I'm going to share a brief story about direct police involvement. So I'll try to keep it brief. But when I was in 4th grade, my mother got a restraining order against my dad. I don't know if she told him. His side of the story is that she never told him, but I don't know the truth of that. I do remember going that morning to our aftercare program and her dropping off the court order. I remember at the end of the school day, my teacher told me to stay after class, and she escorted me down to the gym for aftercare. It was, just a program where you wait till your parents to be done with work until like 5 or whatever. She escorted me, which I didn't understand. She had never done that before. And my sister wasn't there. And I was like, where's my sister? My teacher was like, oh, I think she's still in the classroom. My dad shows up with his boyfriend at the time to pick me up. Normally it was his visitation day, but because of this restraining order, he wasn't supposed to come pick me up. My teacher, I remember, wrapped her arms around me, held me to her, and said, you can't have her. You can't take her. Go to the principal. He'll talk to you about it. I had no idea what was going on, but my teacher said, go. unpack your homework. You're going to stay here today until your mom comes. I did what I was told. I remember then my dad storming into the gym about 5 minutes later, screaming, pushing past my teacher, my principal in tow, screaming, "You can't take her, you can't take her." He grabs me, physically grabs me off the stage of the auditorium and tries to take me away. The door gets barricaded. At this point, my memory starts to go fuzzy, because at this point I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on. I was looking to my dad's boyfriend for reassurance, and he didn't know what was going on. So we were just like both. My sister was still missing. I still had no idea where my sister was, and my dad was trying to rip me out of the building. And so I black out. I don't know what's going on. Eventually, I guess it had to have somehow been resolved and my mom came, but during that point, the police were called and my dad was taken away. I don't know, if he went peacefully. I hope he did. But I don't remember any of that, but I know the cops were there because the next day students in my class said, "Did you hear somebody's dad got arrested last night? Somebody's dad got arrested in the school. The cops came and took him away." And I didn't know where my dad was. And I found out later my sister had been kept in her classroom by her teacher so that my dad couldn't find her. And so this whole situation, which I know is a bit of an extended illustration on the point, is just that ended up being a large amount of my existence, was having a traumatic situation, not interpreting it all or understanding it all, and then having bits of it told to me later in this weird third person. And that happened again and again. That happened with, somebody told me that my dad was gay before he came out to me. That it was really bizarre just how much I wasn't allowed in on like important pieces, or how much my own mind maybe was shielding me, but then like how quickly that gossip spread. And because of it, I went inside. I don't remember having behavioral issues, and I don't remember being, punished for behavioral issues, but I do remember explicitly a lot of being scolded, a lot of being told that I thought I was better than everybody else. I remember getting yelled at because I followed the instructions that a teacher gave me, but I guess I followed them too literally. And then it was a very complicated situation where like I was supposed to turn a microphone off and hand it to the next person in line because we were doing a song, and I did, and the other person didn't remember to turn the microphone back on. So I was like, "Oh no, turn it back on." And then I got dragged into the hall and yelled at by 3 teachers for making a scene. And I think I was in 4th grade still. I got yelled at for making a scene and trying to take all the attention away because the person after me forgot the instruction and didn't turn the microphone back on. So that was a thing. And that was toxicity that I got from teachers. And like I mentioned, especially in middle school, bullying was rampant. So I just kind of dug into my studies. I just became the nerdy quiet girl because it was better for me to at least have that, I guess, over them than to feed in and try to be part of a group that was just never going to accept me because they knew dark things about me that apparently I didn't even know.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was trust and making friends a tough thing for you and your sisters, knowing, the whole school might know things about you?
Yeah, it was bad. I started with more friends than I graduated with. I had a good amount of friends in kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade. By 8th grade, I had maybe 2 people I could really consider a friend. Um, and most of them were, you know, the most of the people who were nice to me were also considered like social outcasts, new kids, kids who were there, like immigrant students, so they were English as a second language learners. So they weren't, because again, you know, besides homophobic, this town was also kind of xenophobic. So you know, those were the only people who would talk to me. um, and that just made it really hard to feel like I had any support. And I can remember multiple occasions where somebody was my friend and then explicitly stopped being my friend, telling me, I can't hang out with you anymore because you're not cool. I can't invite you to my party. I was going to go to lunch with you, but I was told that, you know, that would be bad for me. So I'm not. We can't be friends anymore. You come from a broken home. That was something I was told.
Yeah. How did it affect your emotional health as you look back? Did you um hide a lot of your emotions, or um did you cry a lot, during the divorce period, and then maybe into adulthood
My
stop trying to show
yeah,
emotion?
my sister actually cried a lot. She was, and she remains like very emotionally porous. But she was made fun of by my family for being hypersensitive. So I didn't do that because I didn't want to be made fun of for being hypersensitive. Um, I became outwardly very stoic until high school. I was very much in survival mode, especially the 3 years of middle school. I ended up going, and I believe this saved my life. I ended up going to my county's magnet high school. So I ended up in a place where academic rigor was actually rewarded. And there were more people like me, more people who had been, you know, socially on the fringes. It was a much more liberal environment. It was the first place where I was able to like challenge my sexuality, um, and realize, oh, wait, I might be queer. You know, I had a new environment at that point where I could start to learn and express myself. And I think, and this very like this happens often with trauma cases, where once you're out of the traumatizing situation, because this was also around the time where custody things started to even out. So the active like war zone was settling. As soon as I had an inch to feel something, I took a mile. And even though my outward life was better, I had friends. I got a boyfriend in sophomore year. I was doing theater. I was hanging out with people. I was going to parties again. Even through all that, I was at some of my like lowest depressed points. That's when I started, and more content warnings. We're going to be talking about self-harm and suicidality throughout the rest of this. That's when I started cutting. That's when I started having suicidal thoughts. That's when I started really struggling again with panic and with, just feeling hopeless. Um, so that it was weird for me because I stopped, I couldn't understand why, if my life was better, why was I feeling worse? And that was something that was really hard for me to struggle with during that period of time. Um, and I mean, I was a teenager too, so everything was going crazy. My hormones were not helping.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious about your view of love. Obviously, um, seeing your parents, uh, get into this divorce so publicly, and um, maybe that leads to maybe you not believing in you know love working out as a young adult, and maybe into your adulthood, or um maybe fear of abandonment with people that you do become intimately involved with in terms of a
Yeah.
relationship. Um, just maybe speak about how that's affected you, and maybe any advice you would have for someone, again, that's going through something similar, or maybe, 5 years removed from, the divorce or whatever, and starting to experience love for the first time.
Yes, absolutely. It instilled in me some pretty toxic behaviors and some pretty toxic ideals around what a relationship or what intimacy means. Um, I'm going to start by saying right now, I am happily polyamorous. I am happily bisexual. I am married and have extramarital partners. This was not always the case. I I learned some pretty strange things because growing up, I had my mom and my dad, one of whom my mom once they divorced had like one or two boyfriends, but really just got out of the dating game. And she stays that way today. And she's actually very happy and at peace just being with herself, which I commend. But so she was really trying to kind of do it the single mom way. And my dad, meanwhile, was a serial dater. He's married now, and he and my stepdad had been together for years. But they both went through this transition period where they went in completely opposite directions in how they coped. So I don't know that either of them really was a great example of how to do it. Um, but it definitely wasn't, I wasn't able to really see a model of successful relationship building until I was way older, until I was already, my dad's got married when I was in college, so I was already an adult by then. So the only other like real couple I had as a family role model were my grandparents, and my grandparents have been married for 64 years now, which is incredible. And I will, to their credit, say they did provide me a stable base when I needed it. Like when my sister and I needed somewhere to go, they were there. They had routine for us. We knew what to expect when we were at grandma and grandpa's house. We went on vacations with them. So they really were an anchor for us. They were involved in the family politics to extents that I've learned as I've grown up and I'm not super happy with. But it is what it is. They were my dad's parents. They were going to take sides. It's what it is. But they were my only real like close other day-to-day role model. And they were, I mean, they worked well, but they are a 64-year married couple. So they have a lot of old school ideas. They're Brooklyn Italians, they're Roman Catholics. So, divorce was never an option for them. Then they definitely fall into those traditional gender stereotypes of like the woman keeps the house and the man is, more of the finance handler, this and that. My grandma did work for a while, but it was a traditional setup that didn't quite jive with me for some reason. But I thought, well, it's worked for them. They go everywhere together. They're considered like, joined at the hip. This is them. They're in it forever, no matter what. And it's worked for them for decades. So that was what I thought it had to be. And I didn't understand, obviously I wasn't alive for their early relationship. I wasn't alive for many of their years together. So I never, and they have always been very quiet about it. They're very much, and my whole family has been, that's the type of don't air your dirty laundry. Don't show people the cracks. So they would never really fight at me. They would never, there was always the like naggy, but like, I never knew how to have conflict in a healthy way, because for my parents, conflict meant terror. And for my grandparents, conflict didn't exist. Conflict meant, my grandpa saying, yes, honey, yes, dear, and just like it going away. So I never understood how to have actual conflict. And so the lessons I picked up from that, long story short, was if you're going to be with someone, you have to be with them forever. Because if you break up, it's going to be bitter and bloody and just terrible. You have to be joined with it. You have to be just with them, and they are your identity, and don't go anywhere without them. Don't have life outside them. And then 3, don't fight. Just don't fight. Like anything that could go wrong could be the end. And I took that into my first few relationships. And I am so sorry for it. My first relationship was actually long distance. And I was not kind. I was very clingy. I had very high standards for my boyfriend, of how much he had to communicate with me. And it's very clear now that I did not give him the space or respect he needed to be able to grow as a person as well, because I was just so afraid. So that was hard. And that pervaded through a couple of my relationships, and also meant that because I was so scared to be alone and so scared of what it could mean, I had troubles with like fidelity. I was the kind of person who I wouldn't break up with someone until I had another person waiting in the wings, because I was too afraid to be alone. And that hurt other people. And it certainly didn't make me feel good about myself, about who I was. And that was hard, because I actually I got married in my early 20s to just an absolutely sweet, wonderful man. We're still friends, but I did not treat him right. I really didn't. He's, very patient with me, very understanding of the mental issues that I was going with. He was there with me. We went to college together. So he saw me during really my dark, dark days of college where, I had a mental breakdown, that I can talk about more later. But he was there with me for the whole thing. And I was clingy to him. I was demanding of him. I honestly don't know how he dealt with me. And then I left him, because I'm glad I left him, because I was with him for the wrong reasons. I treated him more like a parent than a partner. And so I think it is good that he's not emotionally responsible for me. But I definitely regret the way I did it. I definitely regret the things that I did to him during that whole period. And I think the fact that he's still willing to be friends with me probably says a lot about him and his character, to his credit. So, it was a difficult time, but funny enough, I guess appropriately enough, a lot of that happened right when I was starting therapy, for the like ongoing therapy for the first time, not just college counseling. And I think that divorce, and seeing that a divorce can be amicable, and seeing that conflict can exist and it not become this terrible, violent situation, I think it did help me. And I think it helped during my therapeutic recovery, that I was able to say, oh, okay, I can abandon some of these principles. I can abandon some of these things that I thought had to be true and still survive. So that timing ended up being good for me. And being with my husband now, that was a big part of my transformation as well, because I went from being with somebody who pretty much let me do whatever to being with someone who was not going to settle for less than my best. And I think that was something that was really important and something that I needed at the time, even though I didn't want it. I wanted to just be treated like a princess and have everything I asked for.
Is that, maybe with your partner today, is that something you had conversations with, you know, I've been through this to the point of, maybe when I hear someone raise their voice or get into a shouting argument, it triggers me back to when I was 8, or like, are those things that you had, prior to, maybe, um, becoming more serious or things like, and is that kind of just from your own personal experience, what you would recommend, um, for someone that's been through a similar situation like yourself?
Yes. Finding the words to communicate and finding my own insight around why I was acting the way I was super important, because until then I couldn't work on it because I didn't question it, because I didn't know what it was. I thought that I was just following what is normal and natural for successful relationships. It wasn't until I realized, oh, this is dysfunctional and this is why, that I was able to have those conversations and I was able to actually figure out what the problem was. And so being able to have that communication and being able to have that insight in yourself is something that I really I struggled with for a long time. And it tied into things that weren't even relationship related on the surface. So things like my you may have heard of like a bunch of like the different trauma reactions, like fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fawn, or people pleasing, or what's another good word for it? Acquiescing, I suppose, is another one of the trauma reactions. And that was the one I largely fell under. So basically, if something scary was happening, I would make a white lie. I would back down from my stance. I would start to, just apologize profusely. Like I would take it on myself to try and calm the other person so that the danger for me would pass. And turns out when you're having difficult conversations about difficult topics with someone you're really emotionally tied into, that's not always the best strategy. So I had to overcome that. And I did not like that because it meant I had to grapple with issues of guilt and shame, honesty, having to change my behaviors, having to change my communication patterns. And I am honestly a little surprised that I have made the progress I've had on it, because it was so pervasive to me. I would do it without even thinking. So it's definitely a situation where these aren't skills that if you weren't like modeled them or you weren't taught them, like you're not going to pick them up just naturally. And it's always worth examining. Like if a behavior of mine or a pattern is emerging where I am getting hurt, someone else is getting hurt, and it always seems to revolve around these same things, maybe this isn't a healthy pattern. Like maybe there's something here that I've been taking for granted that needs to be questioned. And I think being able to, like, whether it's uncomfortable or not, and usually, especially if it is uncomfortable, being able to sit and question those and then try to work on shifting them, it's gonna hurt in the meanwhile, but once it's done, it's gonna make things just so much easier. And it is gonna require personal healing. My husband and I, we've done couples counseling, but couples counseling also doesn't really happen in a vacuum. It works best when the individuals are also getting counseled, because it's usually a conflict of stuff that's coming up for yourself, and you need to work on yourself as well while you're working on the interplay between you and your partner or your partners. So I would, definitely recommend always like looking for those patterns. questioning things that you'd taken for granted, um, getting help where needed, and also recognizing that your past influences your present, but it doesn't have to control your future. So, taking all those things into account is, I think, the first step to being able to just make progress, and is probably more actionable than being said or than being told, work on your communication skills.
Yeah. So for you, you would say therapy was the number one help for where you are today, or or were there also any other books or anything else that you feel like have helped you to where you are today?
So many. I mean, I will admit that, having a decade of therapy with a therapist that I really, really trusted, was the biggest part of it. Shout out to Virginia. She's fantastic. Um, and also, I did find a medication regimen that worked for me as well, that largely helps to control my panic so that I'm able to deal with more anxiety inducing topics and not, just completely spiral. Because I do have a chemical component to it as well. And sometimes you need both. So no stigma there. But I would say there are a lot of general practices that I find to be really helpful. For people who are interested in trauma, the kind of like gold standard book that is recommended is The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk. And he is kind of like the father of like trauma, like modern trauma treatment. Talks a lot about kind of what I had mentioned as a kid. When, trauma impacts the mind, it also impacts the body. And you may have reactions to your trauma that you didn't know were related to your trauma. You may have thought it was just a chronic illness, or it was just an injury, this and that. And it could have been trauma related or trauma exacerbated. That was really helpful to know that all of these things are connected. Also intuitively makes a lot of sense to me that, our mind and our body are not two separate spheres. I also like, this is more geared, I will say, towards a neurotypical audience, is Brene Brown's work, because she talks a lot about loneliness, belonging. Her book Rising Strong, I find, is pretty good for dealing with self-conflict around having to reckon with something maybe you've done or something hard you're feeling, and being able to sit in that and live with it and then do something with it. So I do like, the way she talks about those issues. Goodness, I could probably come up with like a reading list.
No worries, no
If
worries.
you'd like
I was
to put
just,
in a
I was
description.
just curious.
But those are all things, anything that kind of sits around, the work of Marsha Linehan. She created or developed dialectical behavioral therapy, which talks about being mindful and present with yourself and being able to, kind of examine where your feelings are coming from, why your feelings might be so strong, and why like distress really gets to us, and kind of like helps put it in a framework that for me makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, I can go up and down. There's so much good stuff out there, both in the trauma field and just general psychology.
Yeah. I'm curious, obviously you had friends throughout high school, college, and adult life. They might be listening to this and go, oh, I wish I had done more or something. Is there something, you would recommend, to a friend where they're aware that, their other friend has gone through, a divorce when they were in their childhood? Um, is there, in terms of being a support network, or is it kind of just, just always being open to deeper conversations, things like that?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say when you have a friend who might be struggling with something, whether it's because of a traumatic event, whether it's because of a mental illness, or, really anything like a current hard situation. Um, the first thing I would always recommend is take mental inventory and emotional inventory of yourself, because it's really important that you have your own healthy boundaries. I definitely would not say always be open to deeper conversation unless you feel like you really mentally and emotionally can handle that responsibility. Because a lot of times for people, like, having that open hand can be a very rare event. And I know, at least I can speak from my experience, that I will take what is given when I need it. And I do rely on the other person to tell me, I don't have the space for this right now. Because otherwise, I'll keep asking and then I'll feel guilty and I'll think, oh, they probably didn't want to, but they did because they were felt obligated and this and that. And, then just end up in a sneaky hate spiral. But being open and honest about your healthy boundaries, being able to say, hey, I have emotional energy for you right now. Can I take some of this burden, or do you want to talk? That is really helpful, because being able to know when you're not in a place to lend that help means that when you say you are, that you're being genuine about it. I really like the phrase, learn to say no so that your yes means more. So be honest with those boundaries and make sure that when you're offering help, it is something you legitimately can offer at that moment, because it does take a lot of the stress and tension away to know that if you are lending an ear or lending a hand, you legitimately want to, you don't feel obligated. That's number one. Take care of yourself first and make sure you communicate the boundaries. And then the second part, I would say, a question I always love to ask is, what are you looking for right now? Would you like advice? Would you like to vent? Would you like sympathy? And let them kind of lead the conversation, because it's very easy to immediately fall into problem solving mode. And sometimes we don't want the problem solved.
Yeah.
um, there's a really good episode actually of Parks and Recreation where Rob Lowe's character Chris Traeger has to be taught to stop doing that, because every time his partner's like blah 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 and like complains about something, he tries to fix it, but she doesn't want him to try and fix it. She just wants him to listen. And so he has to be taught, sometimes the best thing to do is just say, wow, that sucks. And sometimes that really is just what you need. So don't take it on you to fix other people's problems, because at the end of the day, they are their own person. You can't control them. You can want what's best for them, but you can't force them to pursue it. So ask them what they're looking for. Ask them if they want help, or ask them if they just need to feel validated. Ask them if they just need to feel listened to. And do that in a context where you know and they know that you are honestly and genuinely giving of yourself, because you can and you want to.
Obviously, me not having been in this position, but I assume, the pain always kind of stays with you. But I'm curious, do you like feel like at a certain point you were at a pretty good healed stage of, being able to, I don't know if, forgive is the right term, or I guess, do you feel like you got to a certain point like that? And if there are people, and if so, if there are people that are struggling with leaving that anger, or towards their parents for causing this pain, or if they're struggling with having those negative reactions when, I don't know, get into a small fight with their parents again or whatever. Like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about the healing points, it's very personal. It's, for some people, reconciliation is an ultimate goal. For some people, you come to the realization that like you're never going to get to a place where you have what you once had. And for me, I really feel like I kind of turned a corner when I was able to go back to New Jersey, go be around my family, and not feel like constantly triggered. I knew it was there. It was there in the background, but I was able to choose my reactions to the feelings. Um, I knew I was at a turning point when I was able to be spoken to in ways that would normally be triggering and react in a manner that I felt good about, in a manner that I felt furthered my goals and didn't make me feel like I was giving somebody else my power, letting somebody else control how I think or act. Um, and it's not perfect. And I still have days where it's really hard. And I still have moments where I doubt myself or where, you know, I feel that kind of grief. And it is grief. And I don't want anybody to think like, oh, well, it's something that you just have to get over. It's like, it's not like they're dead or whatever. It's like, yeah, but the relationship is gone. The closeness, the even just the ideal of what a family is, that's gone. That's different now. And there is room for you to both recognize that families come in all shapes and sizes. And, the nuclear family is by no means objectively better. There's room to accept that and to make peace with that. And there's also room to grieve the loss of what you had expected would be your path, what you expected for your family. Um, and I think giving yourself that compassion is a really important part of that healing process, of recognizing that it's okay to hurt, it's okay to have conflicting feelings about the situation. Like, looking back on it now, I am so glad my parents got divorced. Like, if they stayed together, oh my God, it would have been awful. Like, oh God, no. My mom is happy not having a man. My dad is happy having a man. So, like, this was good. But that doesn't mean that I can't recognize that the process to get there sucked. Um, and it also doesn't mean that I don't have responsibility for what I have carried into my adult life. It's not my fault I was traumatized. I did not deserve the things that happened to me, but I'm still responsible for my behaviors and my impact on the world. So I think healing really, when you get down to it, comes to being in a place where you feel you have an awareness about yourself and you feel like you are able to engage in the world in the way that you truly want to, and in the way that feels authentic to you, and in the way that feels like you are moving through life in, some manner of, whether it's, peace, joy, comfortable neutrality, general health, whatever that adjective or that sentiment is that you want for you. I think that's where healing is. I don't think there's an objective standard for having to forgive somebody, having to move on in a certain way, having to exhibit certain level of functioning. It's really when do you feel that you're tolerating, that you're managing well, and that you're moving forward in the ways you want to move forward.
I'm interested. Do you acknowledge or recognize like the strength you had as a child and the perseverance you've had um, going through all this, whether emotional, verbal, physical, like different things were, given to you, and you've persevered and gotten yourself to a point where you're sort of, whatever normal member of contributing society is defined as, but um, is that something you've recognized?
I have to think on that for a second, actually. It's a good question. I think the answer is I do now. When I was going through it, I followed the refrain that many, many traumatized people follow, and many, many people with chronic or mental illness follow. I am broken. I cannot be fixed. I am hopeless. This is hopeless. I can't possibly see how it could get better. People would say, it gets better with time. And I would say, that's BS. That's not, like, this is awful and it will always be awful. I think that, I think that it was difficult for me to recognize the goodness in myself. One moment. I think what had to happen for me to be able to break that cycle of I'm not good enough, I can't do it, was I had to put it into smaller chunks. So rather than saying I was going to get better, like I can't define better. I can't define like what happy would be, because like I had never experienced the end goal that I wanted to attain. And so trying to do so was like a folly. It was impossible for me to even consider. So I think breaking it down and being able to say, okay, you know what? Let's just focus on like a goal that I want right now. Like let's knock down like my panic attacks. Let's work on my panic attacks. And then okay, let's work on the lying issue. And then, just finding small things I could work on made it so that finally, eventually now I can look back and I can say, this is better. This is better than it was. But in the process of it, I didn't see that. In the process of it, I saw I am still failing. And, even when that happens today, I have to remind myself sometimes, like, remember, you've been through a lot and you have made considerable progress. You can't be perfect. Don't try for perfection. I'm very full of quotes today, but one of them is progress, not perfection. Is take one step and get yourself to the place you want to be closer and closer. But don't consider it like, something that you're going to achieve and you're going to achieve happy. And then everything's going to be wonderful. It is never going to be bad again. Just, you keep going.
Yeah. I'm also curious, have you had conversations with your parents in adulthood, where you guys have been able to be honest with each other, or you've said to, um, one of them, I think you confided too much in me, or, for an 8-year-old or something like that. Have you had any conversation like this?
Yeah. So my particular path to healing actually did not require that. For some people, that confrontation or um, that part of like reconciliation where you need to share, that is a really big part of the growth process and being able to come to peace with it. For me, I kind of went in a different direction. For me, I knew that having those conversations, especially at certain times in my life when my relationship with one or both of them was kind of rocky, I knew those conversations weren't going to be fruitful. I knew that they wouldn't be received well, that I was going to struggle to communicate them in ways that I needed to. And I don't think they would have gotten across what I wanted them to get across. And honestly, I didn't even know what I would have wanted to get out of it. For some people, like, they need to feel heard and validated. Some people need an apology. For me, I didn't know what I would get out of it, and it didn't seem worth the trouble. So I chose not to. I chose to work on it personally. Um, and that was the right choice for me. For some people it's not. For me it was. For me, and I didn't shove it away. I didn't just ignore that part, but I took it from an acceptance perspective of this happened. I can't change that this happened. There are two things I can do though. I can change how I react to it and how I behave in spite of it, and I can work to make sure that I'm not propagating that to other people. So that's kind of the stance that I took. And being able to do that it was really just kind of refreshing of being able to say, I'm going to acknowledge this. I'm I'm going to make my peace with it. And I'm going to use that knowledge to do something about it within myself. And I used it to motivate me. And so that's been helpful.
Maybe you answered this before, but I'm curious, like, do you feel it's, you know, necessary for you to forgive them in the sense of understanding they weren't whole as an individual, i.e., you know, your father didn't understand his sexuality or things like that. Like, is that a place where you, you know, them not being together is why, or them not having themselves together is why, there was so much hurt? Um, or is that almost too forgiving of a mindset?
I wouldn't say it's too forgiving. I think, different people are able to reach different levels of forgiveness with people. I will say my level of forgiveness with my mom and my level with my dad are different. Um, it's There was some clarity that came with understanding both of their backgrounds, of where they came from. Like I said, I didn't know much about my mom's family. I didn't know until I was older that she was actually adopted, that there was a lot of trauma in her childhood. um, Learning that actually did help me gain some understanding about why she had done some of the things she did. um, I learned more about as I learned more about psychology and mental issues, I also learned about some stuff that my dad lives with, some conditions he deals with that I don't think he acknowledges, but
Mm.
as a therapist, I know exist. Um, and the way that each of them have handled their circumstances has made my choice for how I want to relate to them now very different for each of them. And I would say there is a level of forgiving. It's hard to say because I don't want to say that I absolve them, I guess is what I'm trying to get at, is like,
That's fair.
yeah, forgiveness sometimes implies an absolution or a release of responsibility. I don't absolve either of them for what they did. I don't believe their actions were appropriate in the moment. I don't believe that, some of the choices they made and some of the things they exposed us to were healthy or correct. Um, I can understand and see why some of them existed, and I can feel empathy towards those situations and for the difficult decisions that each of them had to make and the difficult things that they were each going through. And I hold that in the same space as maintaining accountability for what had happened. I still feel they're accountable for the action they had and the impacts that it had on us. Um, but I don't let that influence who I can be. I don't put the responsibility of my recovery on them. Um, they have, they have their own lives to lead. And I do put the responsibility now of, they need to support me. And if they're not supportive and if they don't act like parents, then I don't talk to them, or,
Yep.
if I'm not getting what I need out of that relationship, then, and this may sound sad, but it is more peaceful and more healthy for me if they don't treat me the way I want to be treated. Then just because I share their DNA, I don't consider myself to owe them anything. Some people feel that they must reconcile with their parents. Some people feel that, it's family. So no matter what, you have to. And I don't subscribe to that concept. I think that, yes, relation is important. And, they did keep me alive for 18 years. They did give me what I needed. I did eat. I'm very lucky and privileged to say that, I never dealt with homelessness. I never dealt with hunger. I was never physically or sexually abused. So, I definitely did have a generally, stable ground upbringing. Emotionally, though, I didn't. And I don't think that you need to give somebody a pass for not having provided that. I think it is possible to be sympathetic or empathetic towards a situation where difficult decisions had to be made and, the best actions weren't always chosen. But still not let that, again, absolve the person of what they did. So that's kind of where I sit on that, is that almost competing set of ideas. But for me, I'm able to make a peace with it.
Yeah. I'm curious, as you got into your adulthood, is there some aspect of this that you would that surprised you in terms of how it affects you, or like how does it, on a daily, weekly, whatever, monthly, um, how does it affect you, or how often do you go back to that 8-year-old self, or whatever, like, how is your relationship with, that time period in your life today?
Yeah. I would say one of the biggest surprising things for me is that, for someone who is so academic, for someone who is like so like cerebrally minded and, tries to be logical and stuff, it does surprise me. And it really did knock me for a loop just how easily I could get triggered and put back into those old environments. Like being back in New Jersey, I would just revert to old patterns. Like I may have worked and done a ton of, improvement on the ways I was communicating or responding to stress or this and that, and then go back to New Jersey and it would be like nothing had changed. As soon as I was back in that environment, I was reliving.
Mm-hmm.
And it shocked me how easy it was for even someone like, who prides themselves on, kind of being intelligent and whatnot, to just get dumb about it. Like my brain turned off and I was just right back in survival mode. And it wasn't really until I learned about complex trauma and complex PTSD that I was like, oh, okay, this is a survival reaction. Like I couldn't fathom why I couldn't keep it together. And it took so long to recognize, okay, this is why I'm attacking it from the wrong angle. I need to not yell at myself for falling into these old patterns. I need to slow down and just give myself a breath and remind myself I'm not in the same situation I used to be. That was easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I still slip sometimes. But I would say that like that was something that was really, really surprising to me, that even after years of work and physical distance, being back in the environment sometimes can just immediately flip that switch back. And sometimes when you least expect it.
Yeah. Well, Rhiannon, we talked about a lot, in terms of you know, your parents' divorce. I is there an aspect or something that you feel like we didn't cover, or you feel like might be of value to someone listening?
Um, yeah, I think it's important to mention that when things happen to us, um, it doesn't have to be a situation where like you completely move on from it. Um, there are lessons, and I'm not saying necessarily that the trauma is a lesson or you should be thankful for your trauma or that you were traumatized, but there are lessons in the recovery process. There are lessons to be learned with how you handle it and what you learn about yourself, in the ways that, you come out of those situations. And when, your environment changes or when you decide you're going to change your environment. Um, so you can use those situations and the traumatic environments, the traumatic situations as a way to move yourself forward without needing to remain moored to them, if that makes sense. Like, it's okay to recognize that, maybe you're a little more cautious about getting into relationships because of something, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem comes when you're distressed about it. And those are the things to consider is, what is the impact on myself and what is my impact on others? But it doesn't mean that you have to just always be carefree and completely forget about the past. If it's going to help spur you to continue on and be your best self, that's okay. If you need to move on and you need to like just completely detach and start over, that's also fine. There's no right way to heal from trauma. It's got to be for you.
Yeah. Well, Rhiannon, I just want to thank you for being so open and honest. Unfortunately, in the society that we grow up in, a lot of these conversations are sort of taboo, and um, unfortunately, it hurts us as a society because these are things that happen to a lot of people. I don't know what the stats are today, but I remember growing up, I think divorce was as high as 50% in the US. I don't know what they are today, but um, I really appreciate you kind of um, diving in and maybe going back to memories that aren't the most positive, and providing us the lessons in an effort to maybe help someone else in if they're going through it right now, or if they're trying to heal or get better from a situation that happened to them in their childhood. And so I really appreciate it. And I think all the listeners do too as well. If someone wants to reach out to you or just thank you or support you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So, well, I don't do the Instagrams or the Twitters or really the Facebook. Um,
That's all good.
the the best way to reach out to me is probably just through email. You can actually send an email to let's see. I'll give you my main address. It's Rhichi, RHICHI, at gmail.com. And if you are interested in learning more, just kind of about, the therapy process, about what trauma therapy can look like, I'm definitely always happy to talk. I will say, and I'll give a disclaimer, since I am a professional therapist, I cannot and ethically will not provide therapy services or provide like, specific medical or psychological advice, but I am always happy to point people towards resources to get, long-term help.
Yeah. Rhiannon, thank you again so much for coming on. And yeah, I really appreciate all the knowledge and stories you shared.
Thank you so much. I hope it helps somebody.
Yeah, I know it did.